Hi everyone, today I want to talk about the shortcomings of Diablo 4. Now, if you know me, I generally have a lot of good things to say about the game. I really enjoy it. In fact, I have a YouTube playlist with over 200 videos dedicated to Diablo 4 already, and this is before Season 1. So, as a baseline, I really like the game, but of course there's a lot of stuff that can be improved. So, let's go into it. I have a list here that I just put together with some of my thoughts from what I have gathered over the past weeks. And we're going to talk through those different items here. This is certainly not even a complete list, but there are a lot of topics to talk about, and I don't want to blow up this video to 20 hours or something. I have the topics mildly ranked by their urgency, so let's go into it. Starting with UI and quality of life. So, number one problem, stash space. Man, this game has so little stash space, it's very annoying, I gotta say. Now, it is probably okay if you play like one character and you maybe want to play like 2 different builds on that character, and that's about it. But the reality is, people play multiple characters, especially if you play a 3-month season, and you definitely want to play more than one build, or at the very least, you want to have like different options with your build. For example, you want to have some setup for your uber-lative kill, you want to have something for a Nightmare Dungeon push, you want to have something for speed farming, etc. So in general, stash and stash management is atrocious. There's not even a search function in this stash space, so you can't really find the stuff that you're looking for. And I think all of this stuff needs to massively improve in the future. I think like a short-term solution would already be something like just double the stash space or triple it or something like that. And we at least would have a bit more of extra room where we can kind of sort items into different stashes. In fact, in the game, you can actually I think you can even name them, but at least you can put different icons, and you could technically have like a stash for this, stash for that, etc. and leave some space empty if we had more space. The problem with that is I've tried really hard to, organize my stash, and it's just absolutely failed. I have like some kind of very mild sorting, but at some point I just need to use every single open space I can, and everything just gets cluttered. That is really annoying. And for example, trying to find the right aspect that are saved up for a certain build, I have to mouse over every single item in my stash, etc. I guess everyone has seen these problems here, and that definitely needs massive improvement very soon, in my opinion. Then we have respecking. Now, in Season 1, Blizzard has said that they're gonna introduce the Scroll of Amnesia, which you get from the Season Journey. It sounds like you only get this as a one-time reward, and it's not like a repeatable thing. Now, it is kind of a step in the right direction, I guess. In general, a lot of people complain about the gold cost of respecking, which I actually disagree with. I think the gold cost of respecking is more than fair. It's not really high. It's like an hour of grinding for a full respec of everything. That is not really too crazy in my opinion. The problem is the respecking itself. Like, if you want to change one Paragon board somewhere in the middle of your setup, you have to unspec basically the entire thing and then respec everything just to change this one board to something else. Here on the Maxwell Planner, as an example, we have done this a lot better, where we can rotate boards that are already attached. We can move them around, like the entire board, even if you have stuff assigned. And then you can even change the order and stuff like this. And honestly, I would really like to see this in the game. I want to have some kind of Paragon editing mode, for example, and then you can play around, move it around, and then lock it in again, and you have your valid working Paragon setup. As long as it's abiding by the rules, I think that should probably be possible. Then we have inventory management. Blizzard has already said that they're going to improve a few things, like the gems going into the materials tab in Season 2, I believe, and stuff like that. Generally, I don't think the gems are actually a problem, because you just don't pick them up anymore after a few hours playing in Torment difficulty anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But for the most part, I guess some people will be happy about this. Then there is stuff like you have these little inventories like consumables and quest items and so on, and the aspects. Now, I don't really see a point to have consumables like elixirs thrown together with sigils. Now, technically they are consumables, yes, but practically this is extremely annoying, I think, where you just pick up a few potions here and there and it clutters your inventory, and then you have these sigils in between. In general, sigil management is a nightmare in this game. You want to filter them a bit better by which dungeon it is and what tier it is. I think that, for example, the icons themselves could have the tier written on them, for example. or something along those lines. That would already help. And in terms of inventory management, I also really don't like that it's so difficult to drop items on the ground. So Diablo 2 has the technology. I don't know why you don't have it in Diablo 4. You can hold control and click on an item in your inventory and will drop to the ground. Like if my inventory is full in the middle of a nightmare dungeon, I have to like slowly drag out items one by one and drop them on the ground so I can pick up more better loot, because you want to pick up as much as possible to sell it to the vendor, but you also just run the risk of just filling up your inventory with trash, of course. So that would definitely be nice to be improved with like a hotkey, or at the very least make it less clunky, because this dropping items has like a delay. Like you have to hold it for like half a second so that it actually drops instead of just bugging out. So that is very annoying. And also we have this mark as junk feature where you press space on an item, at least on PC version, and then it gets like this slash across, and it is like easier to salvage it or like sort out your items like this. But the problem is that junk is 99.9% of the loot by default, and you need to save the good stuff. So we need exactly the opposite of mark as junk in this game. And we also need a sell all feature, because quite early in the endgame progression, you will actually never salvage anything again, and you'll always sell items to the vendor for the gold that you need, for example, for respecking, etc. Which also brings me to the next point, loot filters. I think loot filters are absolutely necessary, and quite soon in this game. It's already becoming quite apparent if you play even a single character to level 100, you're going to have exactly this problem that I just described. Almost everything that you find is trash, and it just doesn't give you like this exciting feeling of picking up loot and trying to sort through the items. And I'm already quite fast at doing this. I look at items, I can sort out an entire inventory in like 8 seconds, yeah. But I don't think this is the case for many other people. So loot filters can definitely help massively improve the flow of the game here, I believe, where I don't really want to necessarily not see the loot on the ground, but at the very least I want to highlight certain items with, you know, a certain stat on them, or a certain item power threshold at least, or something like that, so that I can feel happy when I see a crossbow drop and it's actually like 3 out of 4 stats and it has like item power 800 plus. You know, kind of relatively simple stuff I want to have on a loot filter, but I think the complete lack of them is a major problem. Next point is the tooltips. In general, tooltips need like a major pass in this game when it comes to character stat details, when it comes to skills, showing the wrong numbers. There's a lot of stuff like that that is just like wrong and inaccurate, and doesn't reflect what the actual calculations behind the scenes are. So yeah, there are a lot of problems with that. Also, certain tooltips are just not really explaining what, for example, a certain legendary does, or certain tooltips actually have like an X when it's actually a plus, or vice versa, and these kind of things. So there's definitely some paths needed here. Then we have the occultist. I made a video about this recently. Occultist enchanting in particular is atrocious when it comes to just how it works, basically. So we don't see which kind of stats you can roll, we don't see the odds, and then you have this priority affix system, which may even be unintended, but at least it exists. And it just makes it so that getting the right stuff on your items that you want, even when you find a 3 out of 4 perfect item, basically, is almost impossible in some cases. And that should definitely be improved. Now, I'm actually a fan of the relatively high cost of the occultist, like, you know, like ramping up the cost really high, because I don't really want to repeat what Diablo 3 has done with the Mystic, where you just get an item upgrade and then you roll it for like half an hour until it has like the perfect roll. That is extremely annoying because it was omega cheap in Diablo 3. But in Diablo 4 we have the other extreme where it's like really, really expensive and the odds are sometimes really terrible, especially because of this priority affix system. And that should be changed. I think this priority stuff should at the very least disappear. And maybe some of the filler stuff could be removed. There's a lot of filler stats on items. You know, like any kind of damage stats on a chest, any kind of damage stats on an amulet. These are all just trash filler stats. And then there's stuff like slow duration reduction and these kind of things that no one ever wants to have on a gear, really. So that can probably just be removed, honestly. Or at the very least, the odds could be lowered. Or maybe the occultist can give you 3 options instead of 2 options to choose from, or something like that. Then we have trading. So trading is supposed to be part of the game, but practically not really. There's like trade channels that only have a few people that are present in your current instance. So basically no one, and you can't really post items, you can't really find items, People do that through Discords mostly, or through some websites or something like that. I think that in the midterm, at least, we need to have some official trading platform that directly ties into the game, and you can kind of like, link an item onto the trade site, and then you can whisper certain people directly through that, a bit like PoE trade basically. And then that system would kind of make sense. Right now, it's basically a solo self-found game, aside from like the very high end where it may become worth it to trade a little bit if you have like really valuable items, and if you are really rich and you want to buy like the best installed stuff. But for everything outside of that, trading does not really exist, which I'm not really too sad with, to be honest. I don't really like trading. I'm more of the SSF kind of crowd, but trading is so disincentivized that it may just as well not exist, honestly. Now, next big topic is the content. So I think that it's relatively obvious that for people that have played at least one character all the way to level 100, there is kind of like a huge gap. You have like really nice progression, like 1 to 50, 60, 70 or so. You start your first character, you do your campaign, and then you do your renown. And the renown kind of keeps you busy with a lot of stuff. And I'm a really huge fan of renown, to be honest. I know some other people are not, and fair enough, some people just want to blast dungeons all day long. But honestly, you do that more than enough. Like, I do nightmare dungeons like 99% of the time. And still, I'm very happy that there is actually this renowned content that at least once in a season for like a day or two, I can do something else, so to say. But in general, open world content is like really trash, aside from Helltide, that you do a little bit to get a few Forgotten Souls here and there, and that's about it. And then you do nightmare dungeons all day long. And then there is a little bit of post-level 100 content like PvP, but not everyone enjoys that. Then there's Uber Lilith. Okay, you beat her once or not, and then that's it. And then you have like tier 100 nightmare dungeon pushing, which is also something that either a lot of people don't do much because there's no incentive, or yeah, you just do it once for the achievement and that's about it. So realistically, I think there needs to be a lot more stuff added, both in the mid games, just to break up this like monotony of nightmare dungeon grinding all day long. So there could be, maybe some other stuff a bit similar to Helltide, for example, where occasionally you go there, you do that thing, and then you go there, do that thing. I think that's kind of the idea of the whole game, where you have all these different types of content, but a lot of them are just so bad. And we also just need more stuff like Helltide, basically. Helltide is a really good example, I think. It kind of keeps you busy in this range, but only for a few hours maximum, and then it's still back to like 90% nightmare dungeon grind or so. And then post level 100, well, it's a fresh game. I don't really expect too much here right now, but long term, we need a lot of stuff. One example of this mid-game kind of content could also be that there is maybe some more of these milestone events, so to say. So you have the capstone dungeon to enter World Tier 3, and then you have the capstone dungeon for World Tier 4. And honestly, I think they are really cool, because those are kind of like some breakpoints, some milestones that you try to reach, and you can do it earlier if you're really strong. You can do it later if you don't feel so comfortable. And it kind of gives you like a bit of a different feel. That's like a breakpoint where suddenly you get better loot, suddenly you get more difficult monsters, and these kind of things. And this is superb. And I think there should be more of these on the way to level 100, where maybe there's another capstone dungeon, or maybe there is some bosses, for example, like a medium version of Lilith. Like, not there's like the campaign version, there's the Uber version, and let's say there's like a level 80 version. And defeating that level 80 version doesn't necessarily unlock a new world tier, but let's say it buffs the monster density in your nightmare dungeons by 20% permanently, or something like that, so that you have a bit of an incentive to go there and do that. And it's like, okay, you've done this, and now you've earned that reward, and going forward, the game is going to feel a bit different. It's going to feel a bit more exciting. That also brings me to the next point, nightmare dungeons. So nightmare dungeons are by far the most valuable endgame activity right now. Aside from farming Forgotten Souls and Helltide, you basically just do this if you want to be efficient. And honestly, I don't really like that you can just go to the occultist and craft a tier 100 sigil right away. Like, when I did my tier 100 push on my hardcore rogue, I had done like, I don't know, like 60 or 70 or something like that. And then I was just grinding more sigil powder, and eventually I just crafted tier 100 sigil. I went in there, I completed it, and that was the end of story. There's like no progression. Like, there's no reason to kind of like go one by one, kind of like how it worked in Diablo 3. I think that was a really cool system where you slowly get stronger, you slowly work your way through, and even if you're like really overpowered and you don't care about how difficult it is, you will get to a point where it starts to become challenging after only a few runs again anyway. So I think it would be nice if there was like at least a one-time unlock tier by tier, so to say, of some sort, where you have to like at least reach certain milestones so that you can craft those sigils at your cultists. So that there's a bit of like this kind of push progression, especially later on when leaderboards come in. That will almost certainly involve Nightmare Dungeons, I guess. That would definitely be necessary so that people don't just go in and craft a tier 100 sigil with a bit of luck and then blast it and they're done kind of. And sigils in general, I think, could also have a bit more options available here. So I mentioned a few things like the inventory management. I would like to see maybe which dungeon it is, or at least which tier or something like that at a glance. And maybe also kind of like a filtering system if you don't want certain affixes on your sigil, or maybe some way to change a sigil so that you can reroll the affixes on it. So you don't really like this one thing, and maybe you can go to your occultist, spend a bit of powder and actually change that sigil to have different affixes. I think it would be nice if there was a bit more options available here. Another problem also for group play is that sigils drop for everyone in the party, which leads to some other problems here, but I'm gonna go into that in a second. Then we have the open world. I really like the open world concept actually. I was very skeptical about this before the game's launch and before I played the betas, but I actually really enjoy it, I gotta say. But the problem is that open world content is kind of just irrelevant. Like, especially with those recent Nightmare Dungeon buffs. Yeah, we have whispers, and you can go around and farm herbs or something like that. You can farm certain monster types for certain drops, but that's not really a thing. So realistically, this just needs a major buff. So I don't know how exactly, but the problem is that open world content is also way easier, like way too easy, in fact, in my opinion, compared to Nightmare Dungeons. There's like a massive gap in the difficulty in terms of the Nightmare Dungeon tiers and the affixes. And then you have open world where just, it doesn't even level to your own character level. Like at 95, monster levels stop scaling, and then you level 100 and you fight level 95 monsters. Like there's no point really to farm them. It's super easy, and only in Helltide it gets a bit more interesting, I think. So all of that needs a bit of like a look, in my opinion. And the same here for different activities. I really like that we have Helltide, and I think there should be a lot more stuff like Helltide. Not necessarily like a copy of it with a different name, but you know, there could be anything. There could be like roaming bosses. There could be like, you know, certain like portals popping up that just throw out demons or something like that. You know, there could be a lot of stuff that you can find that could just make it more exciting to go around. The next big point here is group play. Now, I'm generally a solo self-found enjoyer, and even more so with looking at what group play is like in Diablo 4. So we have leeching and boosting like virtually everywhere. You know, it seems like to me no one is leveling their own characters anymore. Everyone is just getting boosted 1 to 50 in like half an hour, and then they start blasting, or maybe boosted all the way to 100. Like, I don't know. And I think this is a major problem that should be resolved. I think a very easy solution is just don't make experience instance wide. That would solve a lot of other issues as well. And just incentivize people to actually play together. Like, people go into a dungeon, one guy sits AFK at the entrance and leeches XP, the other guy clears it. That is just stupid, in my opinion. And the same thing with like the split farming strategies and blind burrows that people are doing. You go into the dungeon, you spread out in 3 different directions, you clear it like 2 times faster or 3 times faster than a solo player ever could. You get insane XP, you go again, then you reset this dungeon. There's like various exploits and tricks and strategies revolved around resetting dungeon without losing the sigil and all this kind of stuff. So you can like run the same stuff over and over. I think basically all this resetting stuff should be killed in some way, so that we don't farm like the same dungeon over and over, that we don't farm the same cellar over and over, they don't farm the same nightmare dungeon over and over. It's just really annoying. And I think a solution for this could be a bit like the Nephilim Wailer buff back in the early Diablo 3, where you stay in the game, you don't relog, and you get like a stacking like experience and magic find buff. And I think that would already massively incentivize just staying in the game, doing different activities, and, you know, maybe circling around a little bit and trying to find like some farming route. It would definitely be a lot more interesting than this whole like resetting stuff, leaving group and, you know, going into the same dungeon again. And not only that, but there's also like other stuff that people have discovered lately with strongholds, where you can leech stronghold completion to gain like a major XP bonus. And then you can do that over and over and over again, as long as you have some people clearing the strongholds for you. So there is a lot of problems with group play here. And I think that just makes it way better than it should be, in my opinion. Partly because of those exploits, partly because this, XP share and stuff like that. Partly because you can share sigils, and sigils drop for everyone in the party instead of only for one guy in the party who opened the sigil. So this stuff doesn't make any sense. And that should definitely be changed a little bit to more like the PoE map system, I think, where only the map owner gets map drops, for example. Now, I don't really have a big issue with group play being a bit better than solo play or something like that, and group play just generally being incentivized, even when you have players of like various like skill levels and power levels. It's okay that generally you want to group up, but the fact that group play is just like 3 times better than solo play is way out of proportion. This is even worse than it is in Diablo 3. And in Diablo 3 it's already really bad. So this needs adjustments, and we also long-term probably need something like SSF, or at the very least we need like characters with SSF tags, or something like that, where when you create it you have the option to be solo self-found, and you cannot trade, you cannot group until the point when you want to break up with that, and then you have like a normal character again. It would be fine if you just share the same world and the same servers, I think, for SSF, but we definitely need that at the very least once leaderboards comes around. Next topic is hardcore. So I'm a big hardcore enjoyer. Basically, all I've done is play hardcore since launch and in the betas as well. I just like that. The problem is that hardcore in Diablo 4 is already a pretty big meme at this point because of the elixir. I think that the elixir is a major problem for hardcore and should be removed entirely. And so should be the flame shield enchant for sorcerers, I believe. I think cheat devs have no place in Diablo 4. They kind of like ruined the entire experience. They ruined the fun also for people watching me or watching anyone playing hardcore, or like a hardcore race at the season start, etc. I think Elixir of Death Evasion, in case you don't even know what it is, it gives you a cheat death. You can craft it relatively easily. In fact, lately Blizzard has I think stealth buffed the drop rates of these monster parts that you need for them. And also in seasons we get 60% longer elixirs, which will probably apply to this. So there's basically no way that you will not run with a cheat dev in hardcore. So they have already ruined Diablo 3 hardcore. Now cheat devs are ruining Diablo 4 hardcore. And honestly, Diablo 4 is really well balanced when it comes to monster difficulty and like the scaling of difficulty, etc. I think Diablo 4 is in a really good spot. It's a really fair game for hardcore, in my opinion. And if you have the right build and you play well, then you are rewarded with surviving. And that works really well. I don't really think that there's unfair deaths that have happened to me or something like that. It was mostly due to player mistake, and I would really like to see this removed. I think that probably a lot of hardcore enjoyers will agree with this. It will definitely make hardcore a less popular mode because it becomes more difficult, and that will drive people away from it. But the thing is that hardcore is already extremely unpopular for various reasons, and making it slightly less unpopular but making it a lot better is probably the right move here. I think hardcore doesn't need to be played by a lot of people, it just needs to be good. And right now it's not good because of the elixir. And then we have the Scroll of Escape, so in case you also don't know that one, this is a relatively rare drop-only consumable that you can find, let's say around once an hour or so it drops, and it allows you to instantly teleport to town, which in my opinion is a superb addition to the game. So the thing is that you have this combination of those two consumables right now. So you proc the cheat death and then you scroll to town. You can basically never die unless you lag or DC, or you are CC'd while you have the elixir going off and then you can't scroll. So as long as you have some kind of unstoppable in your build, you will never die. And I think that the elixir removed will make the Scroll of Escape even more interesting and hardcore even more skill-based. Because occasionally you do run in those situations where I had a clip of this, for example, that I uploaded the other day where I was fighting the Tomb Lord and then he put the daze on me and I couldn't attack anything, and then he was about to break the bone walls here and I scrolled out. I didn't have the elixir running, so this was just a normal elixir, so I would have died here. And I managed to get out because there was no counterplay to this. So there are some of those situations where I think Scroll of Escape is superb, or also it would allow you to actually, for example, attempt something like an Uber Lilith and kind of like test the waters and still being able to get out and maybe refine your build a little bit and these kind of things, right? So there's a lot of like fine tuning you have to do sometimes. So use it in the right moment when you know that things are going really wrong. You can scroll out, and I think this is great to have. And it's also rare enough that you can't just spam it. You can't just use it in every single situation where things might get a little bit hairy. Whereas the elixir that you basically have permanently all the time, and that is also, it has nothing to do with skill. The elixir is just active, and you may or may not proc it, but if you proc it, then you survive the death, and you shouldn't have, in my opinion, because you just misplayed. And honestly, I think the Scroll of Escape drop rates could also be toned down a little bit. So maybe if it was like half as frequent as now, so one scroll every 2 hours or something like that, I think that would be fair. So that occasionally you have like these things like kind of stacked up, and you know, sometimes you run into a situation where you just need to get out, and that's okay. And again, you can't abuse it. You can't, you know, just use it anytime you need it, basically, because it's relatively rare. And then there's the auto trigger. So that's actually the point I wanted to get to. Blizzard has mentioned like years ago that the Scroll of Escape exists, and I found it's a really good solution, and that it would also protect you when you disconnect. And right now it doesn't. I've tested this in the open beta, I tested it in a server slam, and of course now we have seen that UDC, you die. This is how it works. And Blizzard has said that they will fix that sometime in season 2 or 3 or something like that. I think that's way too late, and I hope that they can maybe make that happen before, because yeah, right now it's very, very annoying that people just die to these lags and DCs and stuff like that. And the auto trigger of the Scroll of Escape when you disconnect should hopefully happen sooner. Let's move on to the classes. So there's a lot to say here, but I just want to keep it a bit more general here. Of course, you know, we have seen that, you know, some builds are really busted, some builds are really weak, and generally, I expect the balancing to improve overall as we go, and then there's new stuff introduced that makes a certain really bad build suddenly much more viable and these kind of things. So I totally expect that to happen with, you know, just some of the really bad underused stuff like, you know, blood skills on Necro, for example, or, you know, something like charge bolts or, you know, these kind of things. And then there's obviously these, you know, top end builds like, you know, anything with Grizzly Rage and Dire Werewolf. It's just really, really strong right now on the Druid, for example, and these kind of things. So if that was like shifted a little bit to be more even, that will definitely be great. And generally, I think that long-term, some classes need like a bit of like a more in-depth look, like for example, Sorcerer defenses, Necromancers just kind of feel like lacking skills and just lacking options to deal with stuff. So those are like the two examples here where I'd say that definitely needs a bit more balancing. And then you have a ton of bugged builds as well. So we have seen like, you know, Lilith one-shots and, you know, like the Shred doing billions of damage. And we've seen this Rend doing robillion of damage and stuff like that. Yeah, it's fine that this stuff exists for like maybe a few days or maybe a few hours. But I feel like these bug builds definitely need to be fixed way sooner, especially long-term when you have leaderboards. There needs to be hotfixes for these kind of things. That, yeah, if people discover these kind of interactions that just are very clearly unintended, you know, like also the Bulwark build, for example, scaling with monster level, I mean, that makes 0 sense. So that should not exist. And yeah, that just needs a way quicker like action, in my opinion. Obviously, that depends a bit on the case-by-case basis, like how much does it break the game? Like we have some examples like Bursting Venoms on the Rogue that is bugged right now and just gives you more procs than it should, and it also deals more damage than it should, but it's not like breaking the game kind of strong. People just use that for Uber Lilith and that's about it. Well, it's a bit easier than it should be. Or yeah, like some kind of like double dipping on Bone Spear, I think, or something like that, that makes it a bit better than it should be. So there are those cases where it doesn't really, you know, produce super crazy results, and it can definitely, you know, it can let it slide a little bit. But sometimes there's just Shred stuff, like the Bulwark stuff, like these things just exist for way too long, in my opinion. And lastly, itemization. So there's a lot of stuff to unpack here. I'm gonna also try to keep it relatively short. Number one, vulnerable. So vulnerable is like required for everything. So if you're playing a Sorc, or if you're playing like a Necromancer that's not Bone Spear, you're gonna have a relatively bad time with this, because they don't have the exploit glyph that makes stuff vulnerable by default when you hit them the first time, and they generally have relatively bad vulnerable options. And vulnerable is its own damage multiplier, and you get massive amounts of this as a stat on your gear. You can get like triple, quadruple, quintuple damage. So this means that you either have vulnerable and you deal damage, or you don't have vulnerable and you don't deal damage. And there's no in between. There's like no way to make builds that do not have vulnerable that are any kind of good. And I think this is a major problem. Vulnerable is way too strong. The values are way too high. And some classes, at least in this kind of like forced vulnerable meta, don't have enough options to apply it. I think long term, it would be better if vulnerable is like way tuned down to the point where you maybe get something like up to double damage or so if you really invest into it, and not like quintuple damage or more. So that it just becomes kind of like an option to like invest into vulnerable and, you know, have that be one source of your damage, so to say, versus investing into something else. But right now, there's not really a competition between those stats, and you need to have it. So that is definitely a major problem here. Next is the crit. It's kind of the same story. Basically, any good build relies on crit. There's like no real way to really build dot builds. There are some examples that exist, like Poison Imbue on Rogue is definitely a dot example, but even that relies on crits to get bigger poisons, for example, through one of the Poison Imbuement upgrades. Or there are certain synergies on a Rogue where you have, for example, the trap-themed Paragon board that gives you critical strike damage when enemies are affected by traps, which makes no sense because the only trap that deals damage on the Rogue is Poison Trap, which cannot crit. So, you know, there are these kind of examples where even the dot builds force you into scaling crit. Or for example, Rend as well. Like Rend has the Gushing Wounds key passive on the Barb. So you have just one example of a dot build on Barb, and you still stack crit. It makes no sense. And even on the sword with the Burning Instinct legendary board, you have like a scaling, like you scale your fire burning damage with crit damage. So all those stuff just should not exist, honestly. Like having crit on every single piece, on every single build, it's just why? Like, why do we not have more options? Why do we not have like real dot builds? Why do we not have real overpower builds? You know, overpower is the same story. So I think that generally we need more diverse scaling options for our builds, so that dot builds actually want to at least try to scale dot multipliers, and that vulnerable damage is not so prevalent. And then there's also overpower, which I find to be a very interesting new solution, but overpower is just so extremely weak because it just doesn't really work with any of the multipliers that you don't really want to use it. Like even on builds that have overpower effects kind of built in, let's say like Blood Necros or something, the overpower still doesn't really add all that much past a certain level. Like it's really good in the early game, like level 20, level 30, whatever. It's really powerful, and then it just like falls off more and more and more the higher you go, and there's like no way to catch up. So that definitely needs like another look at as well, in my opinion. Overpower is just, yeah, useless for everything that doesn't directly synergize with it, which is probably okay. But even for the builds that have overpower effects, it seems really weak. Then we have defenses. So I'm talking here about defensive stats in particular. I kind of like that there are defensive options in Paragons and in skill trees and stuff like that. But then we have the items, especially chest and pants. I keep reminding my viewers, guys, if you're dying too much, you need to invest into really good chest and pants. I was talking about this earlier with like the stats that can roll on certain items with your occultists, etc. There's a lot of filler stats on these slots where all you really want is like damage reduction from close enemies, damage reduction from bleeding enemies, and armor or life or something like that. Like these are like the 5 stats you kind of want on basically any build, on basically any character, where if you don't have this quad damage reduction on your chest and your pants, and potentially also some on the amulet, you're just going to be really weak defensively, and you're going to have a bad time, because these stats are so powerful. A single roll of one of these stats, like damage reduction from close enemies, rivals even some of the best defensive legendary powers. And you can have 4 of those rolls on your item. So this means that there is a massive like disparity between having these defensive rolls on your item, on your character, versus not having them. And number one, this is a noob trap that doesn't need to exist. Like, why are these slots not just like much more defensively themed if they're already like so strongly going in that direction? Why do they have stuff like 5% physical damage on the chest? Like, why does that exist? It does nothing to boost your offense. You know, you can choose to have like 1% extra damage or 20% damage reduction. So it's not even in the same universe. So I think that number one, either those filler stats get completely removed on those defensive pieces, or number two, probably more preferably, those defensive stats get massively tuned down so that there's at least a bit of a choice between offense and defense in those slots. And there is not like this insane, okay, either you have quad damage reduction or you don't have quad damage reduction. So I would rather go with the nerf route. I would nerf defenses because I think that especially in late game, people are getting a bit too defensive, a bit too tanky. And if things are a bit more balanced on the defensive side, it would also lead to like a smoother difficulty curve. Like if you find a chess piece that suddenly has like 20%, 20%, 10% damage reduction versus not having that, you're going to be like more than twice as tanky than before. And these are like way too large swings in power and in, you know, the gameplay feel and the difficulty. Where I think that if it was like just reduced and you have fewer options to stack defenses, it would probably lead to a better gameplay experience overall. And my last point here are uniques. So we have a lot of issues with uniques. For example, a lot of them are just utter trash because they're just too weak. Partly because of what I just explained with the defenses. Like if you have like hands, like let's say Eyes in the Dark on a rogue, they have 0 defensive stats. So just equipping that item, regardless of its power, you lose like more than half of your EHP. Like you just die. So that needs to look at, I think. So first of all, defensive nerfs, or maybe defenses added to those uniques. Same with chess pieces, I guess. So this is like step number one. Then you also have like a lot of like unique weapons. For example, you have the bows on the rogue, the Wind Force and the Sky Hunter, which first of all are bows. They don't have vulnerable damage on them. But secondly, they also have rather weak stats and effects. So I'm not really too convinced of them, at least right now, until we see something like a vulnerable nerf at the very least. And then maybe you could think about them. But sometimes I feel like the effect of these unique items is also like overvalued too much. There's a bunch of like really interesting effects that I just feel like are too weak for the opportunity cost. Like you could have, you know, a doubled legendary power on your crossbow instead of having this Wind Force equipped that just never procs. So there are some issues like that, and I think that there could be a bit of like a balancing here and there. Now, I think it's fine that not every unique is like super game breaking or super OP or something like that. It doesn't have to be. And I generally want uniques to be more of a choice. So I think one example where this is really well done is the Overkill mace. So I'm playing my Kratos bar build right now. I have Deathblow in there, and I found Overkill. It gives a shockwave to Deathblow that does a bit of extra damage. The stats are kind of weak on that item, but the shockwave is pretty nice, and it kind of balances it out. So this is like one of those really good examples, I believe. Overkill is perfect, but then you have, for example, Hellhammer, the upheaval weapon, that is just absolutely atrocious. It does nothing for any kind of offensive value, and that's it. It's just a wasted slot because the stats are atrocious on this. So part of this could be solved by fixing stuff like Overpower. For example, this Hellhammer has Overpower damage, which does nothing, but just like taking a look at uniques, I think, maybe readjusting the stats a little bit. I believe that most of these uniques were just created like a very, very long time ago, and then they were never looked at again after Blizzard has completely overhauled the itemization system. So at least this is what I think happened, and this is probably why uniques are generally so bad right now. And then there's the other problem where you have like very, very powerful and build enabling uniques. For example, on a druid with the helms, you have like this Tempest Raw helm that a lot of builds use right now to get those werewolf storm combinations. And well, you either get lucky and you get it, or you don't get lucky. And I think that target farming is necessary in this game for uniques, especially with more and more uniques being introduced in the game, meaning that you find each of them probably less often. If you want to get a certain unique for your build, there's almost no real way to get there besides just grinding hyper dungeons over and over, because they seem to have some kind of like boost to unique drop rates. And you do hyper dungeons all day long already anyway. We do have this monster family extra drop rate system where you can kind of target farm stuff, but then again, you want to do hyper dungeons all day long. Some hyper dungeons have those monster types, some don't, and you don't really have control over which dungeons you run very much. So generally, target farming is not a thing, and it should be made more of a thing. I think there should be some kind of path towards uniques that is more than just, you know, collect 1000 marks and then just buy it from the vendor. So, you know, like I don't want like a WoW system or something like that, but I want maybe certain dungeons to drop certain items more often, or maybe, you know, as like a way to apply like a modifier to your dungeons, or maybe even an elixir. How about you pop an elixir and that elixir gives you higher helm drop rates or something like that, you know, something that lets you at least push in the right direction a little bit. In any case, this is what I have to share for now for everything wrong with Diablo 4. As I mentioned at the start, I have a lot of negative stuff here, but generally I really like the game. So I just hope that Blizzard takes it to heart and listens to feedback, not just my own. There's tons of other people saying other good stuff as well. And from what we have seen in the past, at least, they do seem to listen. They do seem to try to accommodate the player base and the wants of, you know, everyone. But of course, there's a lot of different opinions. I can understand it's quite difficult, but I think there are generally like overall accepted glaring issues here that I tried to list and try to explain why and what could be done maybe. So I'm gonna conclude with this. Let me know what you think. Maybe there's more things that you want to add to my list. Maybe you completely disagree with some of the things I said. I'll be curious to hear it. I'm gonna check the comments. And let's see what Blizzard will do in its first season and in the upcoming seasons, etc. We're gonna be here for a while, and maybe eventually we're gonna have most of the stuff covered. So that's it. Hope you like this video, and see you guys next time.